I grew up in South Bend and got a degree in 1956 and then went to law school at Michigan, came back here, intending to go into politics, and then found out that I didn't belong in politics, so I ended up practicing law.
He may not have belonged in politics, but Tom Singer used his understanding and practice of the law to ally himself with African Americans fighting for equality in South Bend. And he did this at a time when more white allies were finally making civil rights their focus. I'm George Garner from the Indiana University South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center, and we're telling local history in South Bend's own words.
What schools did you attend in South Bend?
Colfax Elementary, Measles Junior High, and Central High School.
That's David Healy interviewing Tom Singer. Both David and Kathy Odell spoke with Tom in 2005 for the IU South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center's Oral History Project because they knew him as someone who, in today's words, was a white ally.
I guess the question is, you were very prominent in the civil rights movement in the 60s, equal housing, fair employment, access to public accommodation. What made you become interested in civil rights?
Going to Central High School, which was an integrated school. There were some occasions when we would travel, the basketball team would travel. If we went south, we could not get a hotel because we had African-American players. And I remember one tournament in Jeffersonville, we slept in the gym room because you couldn't get a hotel with black players. So that is something I remembered.
Anytime they were north of Indianapolis, he didn't remember black players facing discrimination. But later in his life, he started hearing more stories about the discrimination people faced here in South Bend.
Friends whose parents could not go to the theaters in South Bend without, at least on the first floor, they had to sit on the second floor.
So you witnessed this as a young man growing up in South Bend, and sort of the two different types of South Bend that we had at that time. One for blacks, one for whites.
Yeah.
After his studies in Michigan, he came back to South Bend and started working as an attorney. And in 1963, the mayor appointed him to a committee studying racial discrimination.
That was in response to President Kennedy's call for biracial committees in urban areas. Mm-hmm. And we did take testimony. There was one program, I think it was at Notre Dame, where people who'd been victims of discrimination actually came and gave testimony to a group.
A copy of that testimony is in our archive. I put a link to it in the show notes. Several of the people who gave testimony also recorded oral histories with the Civil Rights Heritage Center, like Audrey Wagner and Dr. Roland Chambly.
And the South Bend Tribune then took at least 6 of those and on the editorial page printed their testimony, which is virtually unheard of.
More and more people were learning what African Americans in this city had been living with for decades. And while that was nowhere near enough to end discrimination, Tom was at least able to use the courts to start holding businesses accountable to the ideals of integration. For example, he brought a case against Slenderform, which was a local gym and health spa.
We had heard that people were having problems even buying a membership there. And so the committee suggested that blacks and whites both tried to apply for membership at the same time.
What they found was striking. African Americans were
Law
quoted
school at
membership
Michigan.
dues more than 3 times the cost white people were. A high school girl who worked there was told by an instructor to keep a black woman in a heat room until she passes out. Fortunately, the girl disobeyed her employer's order. The Slender Form case eventually made its way up to Indiana's State Civil Rights Commission, and Tom testified for those who experienced rampant discrimination. And this wasn't the only time he allied himself with those seeking fair treatment.
I represented some black Muslims. They were in the Indiana State Prison. This would have been in the mid-60s. They filed a civil complaint in federal court.
At the time, in most prisons, Islam was not a recognized nor protected religion. Imprisoned Muslims were not allowed to pray when they needed to, and they had to eat meals with pork.
And so we had an evidentiary hearing on what is religion and were they a religion and did they qualify under the First and 14th Amendment to have the same kind of religious services as other groups there did. Mm-hmm. And the judge ruled in their favor.
Tom was a member of the NAACP.
I joined the NAACP in college, and I was a delegate to their national convention in '62, I think.
He also worked with the Urban League. In fact, he was asked to be the president of their Fair Housing Committee. At first, Tom wasn't sure that he, a white man, should be the president.
I thought that it would be more appropriate to have an African American as the president. And they thought, since the problem was the white community, as opposed to the black community, a white person would be more effective. The black community couldn't buy the housing because of white attitudes.
I love how this group of black activists essentially told Tom, the problem isn't ours, it's yours. Go fix your people. Unfortunately, Tom was only one person. He couldn't fix the problem. And as the mid-1960s moved into the late 1960s, those white attitudes didn't budge. For example, Tom helped survey local nonprofits to look at which ones had any African Americans on their board of directors. They issued a report and, well, the results were not great. Kathy Odell recalled some of the details.
As I recall, it said something about that there was a need for there to be more African Americans in key positions in these different organizations through the city, and I think it cited maybe 5 organizations that were kind of lacking in any kind of service. And I think they only mentioned the Lions Club was the only kind of an organization that actually had black members as far as a service organization.
Yeah. Only one local service organization had any African American members. And while today things are a little different, they're not super different. Most nonprofit boards remain overwhelmingly white. And this was just one element of how race relations were in this city. By the end of the 1960s, those long simmering tensions got to be too much. In July of 1967, it turned into a violent uprising.
Do you have any opinion about why during those years things kind of the tensions came to a head? Was it because things just weren't ever being addressed and
Well, that was happening all over, wasn't it?
Right.
I mean, so
True.
we are no different.
Right.
I remember the riot out on Western.
Mm-hmm.
There was some criticism about the way the police handled that.
That's a bit of an understatement. Police used batons to violently club people. One man was shot in the leg. His name was Melvin Phillips.
Were you in any other marches or any other kind of demonstrations or anything else?
There was a march downtown, I think in support of the fair housing movement.
About how many people were there? Or?
Well, like a couple blocks long. There was a sit-in at the school corporation, and a number of people were arrested.
Tom didn't participate in the sit-in, but he did provide legal representation.
I represented one person that chose to go to trial, and that would bind everyone else.
I've read some articles about the case. There was an incident at Washington High School. They set in at the city school administration, and they had to be forcibly evicted, and they were all arrested.
In the end, 71 of the demonstrators were fined $30 each. That's about $300 with today's buying power. The sit-in happened at the end of April 1968. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King had just recently been assassinated. The president had just announced that he would step down at the end of the year. During this time, people in communities throughout the United States pushed for real, meaningful changes. Listening to Tom, you get a sense that he was interested in that too. For example, he spoke about how just once a year in South Bend, some black and white churches would swap preachers.
Human Relations Sunday or something like that. So on one Sunday a year, they would exchange places. And I was very aware it happened only once a year.
Mm-hmm.
And it became very apparent that that's all it was, because our
So there wasn't
congregation
any other
no,
change with
we
the
were
groups?
all white, and I assumed theirs was black. And so it was a kind of hollow message that was being sent by this exchange, but at least that
Do you have any, do you know what the reason was for that? Was it just, you said it was a hollow message, was it just?
well, it was in the sense that this isn't the way it is. I mean, these are two segregated communities, and the exchange of a minister once a year doesn't change what's really there.
He said it was a hollow message, that just exchanging preachers once a year did nothing to address injustice. I have to say, I really appreciated his honesty and his bravery to call that out. So many of Tom's actions during the 1960s showed a person who was willing to challenge racism brazenly and to not be satisfied with token or hollow actions. Next, Kathy and David asked Tom how he viewed the push for justice since the 1960s.
Some people have said that we're kind of backsliding. You think that's the situation today, or?
I guess the question, are you satisfied with what you accomplished in the 60s?
Tom took a long pause before he answered.
But certainly better.
I've had conversations with a lot of people, especially those who remember the bad old days of blatant, overt segregation, about whether things are or whether they are not better. Some, like Tom, saw major movements towards meaningful change happen. Others, myself included, see how far back we're sliding. For example, our schools are even more segregated now than they were before the landmark Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. And locally, several of our South Bend schools are out of compliance with the 1980 federal consent decree that enforces racial integration. When it comes to housing, according to a 2017 report by the National Fair Housing Alliance, roughly half of all African American people and 40% of all Latinx people live in neighborhoods devoid of any white residents. What's more, Black people are more frequently targeted with higher risk mortgages. And so I think this opens up for us here today a really important discussion on whether things are or are not better. I wish I could have that discussion with him in person, but all I have is this tape from 15 years ago. And back then, Tom saw a change, but he also said there needed to be more.
So there is progress. Not enough, but I'm not sure I know what the answer is.
South Bend's Own Words is a production of the Indiana University South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center. It was written and hosted by me, George Garner. This episode was produced by Jon Watson from the Ernestine M. Raclin School of the Arts at IU South Bend. Kevin Tinmarsh was the co-creator, and its theme music was by Josh Woodward. Are you looking for more honest conversations about the history of South Bend? Visit us and learn how IU South Bend students inspired the transformation of a once segregated, city-owned swimming pool. We offer guided tours and put on numerous public events that show how the history of oppression echoes through this city today. See and hear more history, or plan your visit, all at crhc.iusb.edu.